The snowstorm had not ceased for 6 consecutive days in the mountains, and the main entrance of the house was buried under a thick layer of dense snow that sounded like stone when lashed by the wind. However, just a few meters underground, in a secret room carved into the slope, a mountaineer nicknamed Tomas Garrick remained seated before some gentle embers, feeling warm, well-fed, and with the placid serenity of someone who knows his fate. No matter how much winter intends to ravage everything in its path, this time it will not succeed in taking him. That year, the cold season came early in the Wind River Range, in the region that would eventually become known as Wyoming. It did not arrive as an ordinary winter, but as an oppressive force that settled into the valleys with no intention of leaving, compressing the atmosphere, solidifying the ground, and warning every hunter that in those heights, recklessness was not forgiven. It merely claimed lives. Tomas had already endured many winters in those peaks, moving along the streams that fed into the main river, tracking beaver, marten, and fox, and sleeping on snow, mud, and stone. He was not notable for his strength nor his renown, but he possessed an attribute that saved more people than muscle and courage combined. He acted with deliberation. He pondered each step as if a mistake could cost him his life, and deep down, that was exactly the case. His main dwelling stood like the rest in the region, following the frontier model. Interlocking logs, mud in the joints, a single tiny window, a sturdy door, and a rock chimney on one side. In theory, it was adequate for surviving harsh winters if enough firewood was gathered and one did not act clumsily. For years it had served him without major setbacks, until a past winter suddenly showed him that what many believed sufficient barely sufficed to avoid perishing if one was fortunate. During that first severe blizzard, Tomas witnessed how the roof of another hunter, a skilled man named Marcos, collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow. He found the collapsed hut and, among the rubble, his companion covered with blankets, frozen, without fire, and with no chance to build something new.
Don't be gone.
While the snowfall continued. That scene etched itself into his mind, like a persistent splinter that never stops irritating. That same night, as he stood before his hearth watching the smoke rise and the heat escape through the stone flue, Tomas understood that the difficulty lay not only in the cold or the snow, but in how everyone had chosen to adopt a style of existence with a single vulnerable point, one single room, one single roof, one single heat source, one single way in and out. When any element failed, there was no alternative, no room for error. Then, regardless of personal strength, only desperate improvisation or death remained. From then on, his mind began to revolve around a single notion: how to build a shelter that would not collapse if one part failed, how to design an additional layer of protection that did not require the roof, nor the entrance, nor even the visible chimney, like hiding a section of his home inside the mountains so that neither wind, snow, nor chance could take it from him so easily. At the end of the trapping season, any ruined cabin he found, any tale of an entrance blocked by snow, any chimney that froze and smoked up the interior, became additional evidence that everyone existed hanging by a very thin thread, refusing to acknowledge it. When the next spring arrived, instead of wasting his earnings on liquor and cards, as many used to do in the stores, Tomas focused on studying others' constructions, how farmers dug cellars into the hillsides to store vegetables that never froze, and how the German stonecutters described the ground as a body that retains a practically stable heat if you dig deep enough, and how miners propped up tunnels, regulated the air, and managed to breathe under tons of stone without succumbing to lack of oxygen. He began jotting down ideas, sketching informal drawings in a notebook, and persistently investigating why a basement never froze completely. Even when the wind outside froze the skin, why the earth at a certain depth seemed to enjoy a perpetual spring while the top layer suffered extreme heat in summer or froze in winter. From those dialogues emerged a concept that others considered ridiculous, but that gradually turned into a rational obsession for him. If the ground could keep a basement cool during the summer and prevent it from freezing in the winter, then it could also serve as an insulating barrier for a winter chamber, an alternative refuge, small but very effective, dug into the slope just behind his main house, connected by a secret door, and with a modest fire that, even if it used the same chimney visible from the outside, beat like an autonomous organ, If you like this content, subscribe to the channel. That summer, when he returned to the mountains, his mules carried not only gunpowder, lead, salt, and coffee, but also unusual tools for a fur hunter: straight and curved pickaxes, sturdy shovels, fabric bags for moving soil, hardware for hinges and bolts, nails larger than usual, and timbers destined for a doorway that had to go unnoticed. The others watched him and mocked him, commenting that he looked more like a miner or carpenter than a mountain man, that with so many excavation tools he would end up buried himself, and that no winter justified such effort. Tomas did not reply, for he understood that many of those who were now laughing would be the same ones who, when the time came, would depend on chance, a stroke of luck, and an insatiable stove to stay alive. He selected the site with a care that others would call obsessive, a small hill behind his hut, facing south to capture the maximum winter sun, with a moderate slope, consistent soil, composed of gravel and clay layers, with no signs of landslides, adequate drainage, and the necessary elevation to excavate an entire room, making sure the ceiling was not so close to the surface as to collapse under the first layer of dense snow. First, he built his main dwelling, sturdier than the usual, not larger, but conceived with more intelligence. He placed the entrance facing east to avoid the prevailing winds. He positioned the back wall a short distance from the slope and installed the chimney at a specific angle. He was aware that there, in the future, he would have to connect a second fire core. Only when he finished the dwelling, as anyone would, did he begin his real project, the one that nobody understood. He positioned himself behind, plunged the shovel into the slope, and began to dig. Day after day, under the summer star, he kept extracting soil from the mountain, removing each shovel load into bags so that from a distance, no strange pile could be seen. He widened a passage that went under his own hut and led to a sort of cave that he shaped with the precision of someone who had already imagined it in his mind 1,000 times. He did not want a makeshift hole, but a chamber with precise dimensions, with a ceiling supported by beams and walls fortified with logs, a floor of planks over rock to prevent moisture seepage, and ample space for a person to live there for weeks without losing their sanity or freezing. While moving earth, he repeatedly remembered Marcos, the collapsed hut, the useless chimney buried under snow and timbers. How close he himself had been to running out of fuel on that occasion. How insufficient his experience would have been if the previous storm had lasted only a couple more days. And with each shovel load he moved, with each beam he adjusted in the walls of that secret enclosure, he felt that he was wresting a bit of power from winter, that for the first time he was not content to endure it, but was setting a trap for it. What he still didn't know was that the true test of his winter chamber would not be an ordinary storm, but a tempest so fierce that it would cover the entire summit. It would transform his main dwelling into an icy trap, while a few steps inside the mountain, in the place that nobody paid attention to, the environment would remain temperate. The flame would stay lit, and for the first time, circumstances would be in his favor. The excavation was only the beginning, for an underground chamber without an adequate ceiling becomes a tomb, and without an efficient fire it is an earth refrigerator. Therefore, Tomas dedicated the necessary time to transform that hole into a structure capable of withstanding a winter in the mountains. He calculated the depth and width, using steps and ropes, determining the precise height to stand upright without wasting airspace. He reinforced the walls with vertical posts and horizontal crossbeams, just as he had observed in the mines he explored on the plain. He laid flat stones on the ground, and then assembled a wooden structure that raised the floor a few centimeters above the rock, forming an air space. The roof required even greater care, since upon it there would not only be earth, but wet snow, ice, wind, and the weight of an entire accumulated winter. He installed thick crossbeams, covered them with fitted planks, and added layers of bark and clay mixed with grass. Above all, a thick layer of earth that would restore the hillside's almost pristine appearance from the outside. Anyone passing at a distance would never have imagined that beneath that normal-looking hill, there was a space capable of holding a man, his fire, and provisions for weeks. Access posed the next challenge, since making a simple hole in the hillside would allow entry, but would also let the cold wind and prying eyes perceive something anomalous. Tomas wanted a truly hidden chamber, not a second obvious cave that anyone could loot or cover with snow. So he went to his own cabin and made a decision that any other builder would consider complete folly. He cut into the back wall. Before that, he reinforced the structure with a beam placed high up, wedged between the logs, and secured with hardware he had acquired months earlier. Then he traced a tall, narrow rectangle and began cutting, carefully removing wood until creating an opening large enough for a man with a bundle to pass through. Once the door was fitted, the result was disconcertingly discreet. From inside the cabin, the wooden door blended in with the rest of the wall, and the grain followed the same direction. The joints were so precise that the gap had to be filled with strips of cloth to prevent air leaks. Only a simple latch on the room side revealed that there was more than a log. From inside the earthen room, there was no handle or lock, since that entrance was designed to go from the house to the hideout and not the other way around, like an escape hatch known only to one. Nevertheless, a winter chamber without heating is no more useful than an empty chest. So Tomas faced the final challenge, one that would have turned back more than one person. How to light a second fire without building another chimney that would reveal the existence of the hidden space. If he ran a smoke duct through the hillside, any watchful eye would perceive that something was hidden there. If he didn't evacuate the smoke, he would end up suffocating. The answer he found was as creative as it was dangerous: to erect a small stone fireplace in a corner of the secret chamber and connect it, via a meticulously carved channel between the logs and the masonry, to the main cabin's chimney. The reality was that smoke could come from either fire or even from both simultaneously. He built that additional hearth with flat stones from the stream. He dug a narrow box, deeper than wide, with the bottom slightly sloped to reflect heat inward. He made a small flue, no wider than a hand. It rose hidden within the wall structure until meeting the main flue of the dwelling, several handspans above the visible fireplace. He sealed every joint with kneaded clay and performed tests with handfuls of dry grass and small embers. He watched how the smoke rose through the shared flue. He verified from outside that the column emanating from the chimney was normal, without any anomalous sign revealing what was happening beneath the hillside. It was, at bottom, a system with two fires under one chimney, one visible and one hidden. If you like the video, subscribe. Once the space was completed and the fire tested, only remained to transform that chamber into a true survival capsule, not simply a technical exercise. During autumn, between hunting trips and trap checks, Tomas stocked the shelves he had secured to the walls. At the top, wooden containers sealed with resin containing rendered fat, cornmeal, salt, dried fruits, medicinal herbs, and everything he wanted to protect from cold and rodents. At mid-height, rolled wool blankets, dry clothes, cured meat hung in strips alongside smoked fish, hard breads, and biscuits that would keep for months. Below, tools, ammunition, flint, rope, candles, tinder, a barrel of water, and a neat pile of firewood cut to the exact size of the small hearth. When finished, he contemplated that tiny, tidy, silent room. He realized that if the outside ever became uninhabitable for weeks, down there he had everything essential to disappear without giving up living with dignity. Nevertheless, one step remained: to put it to a real test. A refuge that exists only in fantasy is as illusory as a promise spoken by a drunkard. So when the first snows of November arrived, Tomas deliberately chose to seclude himself in his benign personal trap. He chose a day when the snow was already falling heavily. After closing the cabin door, he opened the secret door and went into the refuge. He lit the small fireplace with some kindling and added several logs. He closed the door behind him and forced himself to stay in that space, as if his main dwelling had ceased to exist. The initial hours consisted of mere observation. He experienced that the heat from the fire spread quickly in such a small enclosure. The mud walls, initially freezing, began to warm up and radiate a gentle heat. The elevated floor prevented that coldness that rises through the feet in poorly built structures. After a while, he almost completely extinguished the flame, leaving only glowing embers. He observed, with relief and satisfaction, that the temperature did not drop abruptly. It was sustained by the heat that the building itself had retained. He did calculations, estimated with the intuition of someone with years of winters behind him how much wood he used inside compared to what the large cabin required. The contrast left him astonished. With a third of the firewood, he achieved more constant and longer-lasting heat. He stayed like that for several days, leaving only to check the condition of the cabin and return to the hideout. He convinced himself that when the moment came, that underground room would be more than a curiosity. He did not know that the real test, the one that would split his existence into two stages, was only weeks away, announced in the sky as a snowy system. Upon descending from the summit, it would leave no poorly designed structure unscathed. The enormous snowstorm of the next winter burst in suddenly, driven by a wind that seemed determined to tear off the entire mountain ridge. In a few days, it transformed Tomas's main cabin into a mass imprisoned under several meters of compacted snow. The entrance was buried. A section of the roof collapsed under the weight, and the cold seeped through every crack. Nevertheless, while the outside became a deadly cell, in the winter room, hidden under the slope, the atmosphere remained temperate. The flame remained docile. The hours ceased to be a danger, and became for the first time something that simply had to be waited out. The storm that buried the summit began like many others, with a slight change in the breeze and a strange silence in the valley. However, in a matter of hours it showed its true nature. The snow did not fall in individual flakes, but in thick blankets. The wind tore them from the peaks and hurled them against the houses, as if yearning to erase all signs of human existence. The roofs bent under the increasing load. The chimneys smoked anxiously. The doors creaked with every gust of wind, and the temperature dropped to such an extent that any exposed area of skin became painful in moments. In the first 2 days, Tomas kept the fire in the main cabin more out of habit than direct urgency, aware that every log he consumed there represented a piece he would lack in his hideout if the situation worsened. Even so, he stirred the flames, cleaned the chimney, opened the door just enough to remove the accumulating snow. He closed it again before the wind could snatch away half the house in one pull. The snow climbed up the wall as if trying to swallow the house. The door became heavier every time he pushed it. His instinct, which had rescued him countless times, began to warn him that he was playing on the edge of a very thin limit. Only on the third day did he try to open the main door. It barely moved a few centimeters when it collided with a dense block of snow that was pressing it from the outside. He understood that the moment had arrived. He who had been preparing for an entire year did not wait for the crisis to break out. He did not remain struggling with the blocked entrance while the wind compacted the snow even more against the walls. He simply allowed the large bonfire to slowly die out. He took some objects he wanted to have nearby. He operated the hidden door in the back wall. He went into the hiding place and closed it behind him, leaving beside the cabin an area that would inevitably begin to lose heat. On the slope side, a room that would be his entire universe in the coming days. He lit the small stone fireplace using kindling and a couple of logs. He waited for the flames to flare up. He settled on the blankets, hearing the wind roaring faintly on the other side of the ground, as if he were on a different mountain in a different winter. Inside, the cold did not burst in violently, but only as a gentle oppression that the heat of the fire effortlessly counteracted. With each passing hour, the earthen walls gradually warmed up, releasing some of the heat they stored. When the flame decreased, he did not perceive the usual drop in temperature of a cabin exposed to the elements, but rather a kind of temperate plateau. This was because the surroundings did not freeze at the same pace as the air. The days passed, and the storm did not cease. Above, on his cabin, the snow piled up to heights that would have collapsed any wooden roof. In fact, at some point on the 5th day, a dull sound pierced the main structure. Everything that winter requires to turn a dwelling into a deadly trap. Beams bending, planks breaking, mass collapsing onto the floor, fireplace useless. Tomas perceived the sound from the secret room, looked up, and immediately understood what had happened. Instead of giving in to panic, he simply went to the hidden door. He placed his hand on the frozen wood, verified that the frame remained solid, and returned to his blanket. His hiding place was safe from that collapse, and the cave-in did not affect the subterranean roof. The main chimney could be blocked with snow and debris. However, its auxiliary flue continued to vent to the outside, hidden, protected by the bulk of the slope. For nearly 7 days, his universe was that earthen space turned into a chamber, reduced fire, rationed use of firewood, simple food of jerky and cooked cornmeal, water that remained liquid due to the heat of the surroundings, deep rest without interruptions. He was certain that no roof would collapse on him, and that no breeze could open a door that led nowhere. No draft would snatch away his heat in minutes. Daily he inspected his provisions and kept track of the remaining logs. He meticulously evaluated the time it took for the room to cool down when he allowed the fire to die down to embers, and each day confirmed what he had suspected in his experiments. That underground room required less than half the firewood of the upper cabin to maintain a comfortable warmth. Moreover, it withstood the onslaught of the outside winter with almost no change. At last the storm subsided, and stillness returned to the mountains. Tomas extinguished the fire in the hiding place, took a deep breath, and prepared to go out. He opened the secret door that led to the cabin. He saw an image that confirmed all his fears since that first death that had marked him. The roof had partially collapsed, snow had taken over the interior, the chimney resembled a blind tower, and the air was as cold as the outdoors. If he had weathered the storm there, within a few hours he would have run out of fire, lost his roof, and had no means of escape. Instead, thanks to the hidden winter room, the disaster was just a distant noise on an ordinary night. Over time, the story spread among the few mountaineers who still traveled that mountain range. At first many doubted it. They thought it was a campfire exaggeration. But those who went to see the hidden room with their own eyes quickly changed their minds. They observed the walls of compacted earth and the small chimney connected to the main flue, along with the full shelves and the raised floor. The camouflaged door, which from the cabin looked like just another stretch of wall, made them understand that it wasn't magic, but something much simpler and more powerful. Planning. A secondary shelter conceived from the start, for when the main one failed, a second chance dug into the hillside. Little by little, others began to imitate him. A trapper dug a similar room under his wooden floor and connected it with a hidden trapdoor. Another took advantage of a natural rock crevice to build his own invisible room, reinforced with beams and mud. Each one adapted the idea to their own terrain, but they all shared the same principle that Tomas had learned by looking at collapsed cabins and frozen graves. In the mountains, redundancy is not a luxury, but the only engineering that truly deserves to be called wisdom. A room can fail, a roof can give way, a door can get blocked, a chimney can freeze. But if you have a hidden winter room, buried in the hillside and fed by a small, steady fire, the blizzard that covers the ridge ceases to be a death sentence, and it becomes just something to watch while you wait, warmly bundled, for the sky to tire. Subscribe if you liked it.